Good morning. This is Steve Onsman. It is the Wednesday Word for September the 2nd, 2020. We are going on, 6 months now of being in this lockdown. So this is the Wednesday Word. Like I said, I'm from Reading, Pennsylvania, the pastor of Calvary, and these are questions from members and friends of the church. So here is today's question. It is from Anna Ackner. Hope you're doing well, Anna. I have read in various places, admittedly poetic rather than theological ones, that Judas's overwhelming love for Jesus, that he was chosen. And the question is, was he chosen by Jesus? Because he was the only disciple with enough love and largeness of spirit to do the horrible, awful thing that needed to be done. That's a great question because a lot of people think that. So first of all, the question is, have you ever seen Jesus Christ Superstar? Because if you have, you would see how Judas is portrayed, and it's been a long time, so I can't tell you exactly, but I remember very clearly that Judas was tormented, but he pushed Jesus to bring about the kingdom, to bring about rebellion against Rome. That's what all the disciples, if you read the Gospels carefully, I think it's really important. None of his followers knew he was the Christ. Doesn't matter. Peter said, "You are the Messiah," blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but constantly they had no idea what he was talking about. So Judas is mentioned in the Gospels a good bit. We know that he kept the money, and so he's accused of being greedy. But we don't have any proof about that. So it's interesting that the disciples, we think of them as this ragtag group following Jesus, but in fact, they had structure. They had money. When they collected money, maybe they had a home, maybe not, but they would stay in different people's homes. So let's talk about Judas. In Matthew 27, we're told that he hangs himself after trying to give the silver back to the chief priests and elders. They won't take it, so he throws it on the floor and he kills himself. And then they use it to buy a field they call the Field of Blood, and that's where they want to bury foreigners because they can't bury them where they're buried. In Mark, he isn't mentioned until he betrays Jesus. In Luke, Satan enters him, and that's the reason given for why he does this. In the Gospel of John, he asks Jesus in chapter 14 if now is when Jesus will reveal himself to the world. So is now the time we're going to take over, and we're going to kick the oppressive Romans out. Then in Acts, we are told that Judas turned aside to go to his own place, right? This is after the resurrection. They have to replace Judas with another disciple, which they do through gambling, drawing lots, which is interesting, right? And so that's why he was replaced, because he turned aside to do his own thing. In Acts 1, he's almost an afterthought. We're told that that they didn't buy, the chief priests and scribes didn't buy the field, like we're told in Matthew, but that Judas himself bought the field and then somehow fell headlong into it. He burst open in the middle and all his bowels gushed out. And that's how he died. So that's why it's called the Field of Blood. The only other thing that is mentioned is that Judas served as a guide for those who arrested Jesus. And that this was foretold, that's in Acts also, and then it was foretold through David in Psalm 69, verse 25. If you read that psalm, I dare you to find any connection, because it doesn't say anything about David or about Judas or about any of this going on. I don't know where they get it from, but that's what they do. Acts does that all the time. The church tradition, however, is very different. There's a Gospel of Judas. It's considered Gnostic. That's a big term, so I'm not going to go into that, but it's wide. It's not just one thing. Written sometime in, maybe in the 2nd, 3rd century. It's a conversation between Jesus and Judas. The only copy we have, or the earliest, was in Coptic, Egyptian, from around 280 AD. It portrays Judas as just one of the guys, one of the gang, who gets secret information. All those Gospels that are not in Scripture are like that, where they come and they tell the particular person it's named after, here's secrets that nobody else knows. That's how they gain power. So Judas, though, is ignored in the church for at least a century and a half, it seems, and barely spoken of or written of. It was a very difficult thing. Why did Judas do it? Was it part of a plan? Did he do it out of his own weirdness, hate? Did Satan come in? All these reasons, we're not sure. And it was later on that the evil nature of being a Judas was lifted up as Judas being Jesus chose Judas, whether because Judas had this flaw or whether who knows. And actually, that's fleshed out by Saint Augustine towards the end of the 4th century. So he's barely mentioned in the scriptures following that. And it wasn't really until medieval times that Judas was lifted to the level of almost being the devil. There's a story that was told in medieval times that his mother dreamed about her conception and that her son Judas would be the end of the whole Jewish race. So because of this dream, his parents, the myth says, put Judas into a small chest and put him into the sea, and he floated around in the ocean, and he landed on the island of Scariot, and was raised by the queen, who at that point was childless. Later she had children, and of course they conspired to get rid of him, and it's a really long, interesting, weird story. But the name Iscariot was where that comes from. That's part of the tradition. The last thing I will say, we're trying to keep this under 7 minutes, right? The last thing is that Iscariot is very similar to Sicari, which was a group of assassins I wrote about not too long ago, who went around creating terror, trying to disturb the Pax Romana of the 1st century. They would go around just stab people, attack soldiers, try to disrupt Rome. So, I think Judas had free will. I think I'm with the story in Jesus Christ Superstar. I think he was zealous to be free from Rome. Rome was oppressive. They were like, think about South Africa and apartheid. Think about England and the colonies. They were an oppressive power who folks want to be free of. So I think the idea of the Messiah always was that the Messiah would free the people, and this mythological kingdom of King David or Solomon or whoever would come back, and everything would be great. So that's the story of Judas in about 7.5 minutes. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.